Islam is one of the fastest growing religious movements of the 21st century, and demographers reckon that with their fast growing birth rate that seems to supersede all other groups, within 20 years or so they will make up 1/4 of the Earth's population. This has brought cheers among the Muslims, especially with their high volume of converts in the Western world, but a concern and a panic for many others. Though most Muslims are moderates, there are an odd few who have a deadly fanatical mind that has been molded by reading certain verses in the Quran. But is Islam a threat to global security, or are they being used as bait for Western governments to impose more laws and tighten the control of civilians worldwide? Let us see. In 1952, world-renowned writer Avraham Manhattan made a very important statement that cannot be ignored. Islam is a potentially formidable religious political unit. Whoever succeeds in exerting even a partial influence upon it will wield a power capable of provoking political and social repercussions in many strategically important parts of the world. Over 50 years after this statement was written, Avraham Manhattan, who worked for British intelligence during the Second World War and was one of the greatest investigative journalists of the 20th century, who had a clear understanding of political events and their future outcome, is razor sharp on his observations of world affairs. Muslim rage has been incited by foolish men like Pastor Terry Jones, who wanted to burn Qurans, and the illegal CIA rendition program, which had the utmost secrecy and was even denied by the former United States Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice in 2005 and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, where hundreds of Muslims were kidnapped and taken to prisons all over the world with CIA private jets. The most famous of these prisons is Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where at present prisoners are on a hunger strike. Some of them have been released and have documented their experience. But what many may find shocking and disturbing is the liaison between British intelligence MI6 and Libya's intelligence during the rendition, as revealed by classified documents via the 2011 Libyan invasion. But other countries, such as President Assad's Syria, was also a part of the rendition program. But now the West has turned on him by supplying radicals with high-tech weaponry, where sadly the United Nations are working alongside these men who have the Al-Qaeda flag on their uniform. Jordan, a US ally, also assisted, as investigative journalist Bob Woodward has confirmed. Jordan was providing fantastic intelligence cooperation and receiving millions in CIA covert action funds to assist in the roundup of suspected terrorists. Jordan was created by the British under Winston Churchill, and its current king Abdullah II was educated at Sandhurst Military in England. The head of Qatar, a Western ally, was also educated in Sandhurst, and the Prime Minister of Dubai was educated at Cambridge, also a US ally. Saudi Arabia was also partly created by the British, and is the only country in the world that is named after a family, the House of Saud. The British Royal Navy currently trains the Saudi Navy, but most of the entire military infrastructure was built by the United States. But as one book confirms, Muslims and their lands are only being used as trial runs and experiments for new weapons and laws they will implement all over the world. So-called sonic weapons, the long-range acoustic device, has been deployed widely in Iraq as well as in California and post-Katrina, New Orleans. Films are the best way to market these weapons, and the LRAD, the long-range acoustic device, which was first deployed and used in Iraq, sends off a screeching noise that irritates the hearing and is used for crowd control all over the world. Drones were first used in the Balkans and then in Muslim lands like Afghanistan and Pakistan, but they are now being incorporated into Western military airspace to spy on innocent civilians. Harvard-educated Cambridge professor John Dorgman is the inventor of biometric identification, the iris scan, that was also first used in Arab-invaded land in both Afghanistan and Iraq to keep a surveillance on civilians, but they've also been incorporated in the West to keep a database on civilians in both the prisons and also when people travel all around the world. And this has enraged human rights groups of violating and infringement of civil liberties. The biometrics data of fingerprint scans was also first used in Muslim lands as a trial run. But when foreigners enter into the United States, they have to take their fingerprints. And even when people go into theme parks like the Disney World and Disneyland, they also need fingerprint identification. And when US truckers go from state to state, they also now have to have fingerprint ID. When children take out books in British schools, they also need fingerprint ID. And even suspects on the streets of Britain have their fingerprints taken by the British police. What is a terrorist? The FBI defines international terrorism as the unlawful use of force or violence committed by a group or individual who has some connection to a foreign power or whose activities transcend national boundaries against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Osama bin Laden was once praised by the West, as can be seen in this article in the London Independent, but then he was turned into the bogeyman or a terrorist. But now anybody can be called a terrorist. Environmental activists, anti-globalization activists, and anti-abortion activists whose direct action to further their political agendas are particularly vulnerable to prosecution as domestic terrorists. So we're seeing anyone now can be called a terrorist. And when people were demonstrating outside of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England, they were considered as domestic terrorists. But as the book Cities Under Siege confirms, there is one Muslim country that is being used as an experiment for brand new Israeli weapons: Palestine. There are images that really come to light, where the state of Israel, who constantly makes it known to the world about the horrors of the Jewish Holocaust, does the exact same thing to the Palestinians, where they have violated more United Nations resolutions than all the other countries in the Middle East put together. When the Palestinian Oscar nominee Umar Barot flew to the United States, he was arrested and almost deported if he didn't text Michael Moore, whose documentary called 5 Cameras gives an account of the apartheid style of the Israeli occupation, where Palestinians suffer nearly every single day. The Palestinians very rarely get an opportunity to show their perspective of the conflict, which creates a deep-rooted bias in people who do not look beyond the mainstream news. But what doesn't help the situation is when films like You Don't Mess with the Zohan, that was written, produced and starred Jewish actor Adam Sandler as an Israeli army commander, portrays Palestinians as dumb, stupid terrorists. But it gets worse when you watch the trailer of Brad Pitt's World War Z, where Israeli soldiers are shooting down infected Palestinian zombies who are trying to cross the wall, which is the separation barrier between Israel and Palestine. You may wonder what Natalie Portman has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She may seem like an ordinary actor who's really against the war by wearing this t-shirt, but that's a deception. She is pro-Israel to the core, and she starred in an Israeli propaganda film, Free Zone, that depicts Palestinians as terrorists. The man on the left is Tamar Pardo, the current director of Israel's Mossad, and the man on the right is Yoram Cohen, the current director of Israel's Shin Bet. This intelligence agency has been given the airplay with a documentary to show what they would consider as a just cause to defend the State of Israel. Though the State of Israel has violated United Nations Security Council resolutions, the United Nations Charter, the Geneva Conventions, international terrorism, and other violations of international law, it is still giving a slot to glorify these violations. Jewish director Steven Spielberg has come under fire from the Arab League for donating $1 million to Israelis during the Lebanon War. And as the Jews are a very powerful economic lobby within the United States government, the United States will always support Israel and its continuous war crimes. But not all Jews support the state of Israel. Many of the Orthodox Jews have acknowledged its horrors. But even though the Bible talks of a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem, there are many Christians who sadly support the pro-Israel cause. Why is that? In a book written in the 1930s by English Protestant Albert Close, it documents how the Jesuits wanted to divert Protestants from labeling the Pope as the Antichrist, and they made two Counter-Reformation diversions. One is labeled Futurism. Reverend G.S. Hitchcock, Doctor of Sacred Scripture, wrote in his pamphlet The Beast and Little Horn, page 7 says, the Futurist school founded by the Jesuit Ribera in 1591 looks for Antichrist, Babylon, and a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem at the end of the Christian dispensation. This was embraced by evangelicals in the 19th century like Edward Irvin, who was one of the first proponents of the secret rapture theory. And then later, Cyrus Ingerson Scofield also adopted the futurist teachings, where he put it in his footnotes in the famous Scofield Bible. The pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian interpretation of prophecy has been embraced by evangelicals like Pat Robertson. And John Hagee, senior pastor of Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, who wrote a book expounding the Jesuit views called Jerusalem Countdown that has been turned into a film.
Israel wants peace. America wants peace.
There's never been an opportunity like this.
A true Muslim must never recognize Israel. Jerusalem will be the price for peace.
Islamic nations coming together in a war against Israel. That isn't happening again right now.
Information that the CIA has been investigating certain apocalyptic events.
People in the administration were actually concerned about the rapture.
Rapture meaning everyone vanishes.
The 19th century secret rapture theory was built upon the false prophetic teachings of Jesuit futurism, and this anti-Islamic evangelical flick, Jerusalem Countdown, endorses America's pro-Israel foreign policy in Palestine. It's amazing what false interpretations of prophecy can do. The men on the 9/11 Commission report make it pretty clear what America plans to do in the Arab world. The United States is heavily engaged in the Muslim world and will be for many years to come. If the United States does not act aggressively to define itself in the Muslim world, the extremists will gladly do the job for us. But this will only ignite more radical groups in Islam and give governments an excuse and an opportunity to pass more laws, share more intelligence data, and keep a constant track on civilians declaring that they are trying to protect them, but will allow Echelon, the Signals Intelligence Global Network, to have more license to snoop on phone calls, emails, fax, and text messages all around the world. And this will slowly and gradually lead to democratic states into places of control. If Islam is not the main threat, then who is?